And joining us in the studio is Sola Fagorusis, Executive Director of One Life Initiative, to discuss more on this issue. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me as well.
Sola, quickly, today is not a public holiday, but it's a day of international observation where we are calling for increased concerted efforts towards global action to see that we stem the tide when we're looking at the trend of female genital mutilation. Now, 2030 is just a few years away, and Nigeria, sadly, isn't where it should be in the fight when we're looking at the rates of prevalence in Osun, Oyo, Ekiti, Imo, and Ebonyi states. What should we be doing at state levels and community levels?
Okay, so that's the target, to say that by 2030 we actually would not have FGM would no longer be an issue for us, here in Nigeria. What should we be doing at different levels? Number one has to do with awareness. A number of people still haven't had had enough information that there's something called female genital mutilation. Yes, at the local level, when we go there to engage, it's so-called mutilation again because of what is done to the girl child. That's why we try not to say it's circumcision, so that it's not equated to male circumcision. It's not because you have male circumcision for the guy and then you have to equal things and have female circumcision for the girl. So we're saying that a lot needs to keep happening in terms of community sensitization. We need to see people publicly come out to actually declare and say that this community has abandoned this practice. The fear again around this is that for every knife that is dropped in a community, there are 1,001 other knives back in the room. So how do we ensure that this, in terms of culture, becomes a thing of the past? Knowing fully well that culture itself is not static, culture is dynamic. What was very colorful yesterday is no longer colorful today. Aside from this as well, government also needs to step up its own in terms of intervention to make sure that the laws actually become applicable. We need to see more in terms of enforcement of the law. Yes, we know that this is a very difficult one. The UK itself, in the last 34 years, just secured its first conviction, this year. Someone is going to be, possibly going to jail, just this year. So to tell you that in terms of, practices like this that have, deep root in culture, what happens is that you have to do a lot in terms of behavioral change. You have to do a lot of work in terms of attitudinal change. So we want to see more of advocacy in that direction to make sure that people, especially young people again, can also begin, proactively become part of this. By 2020, by 2030, the generation of people who are, children today would definitely have become young people
adults,
who have become young adults. So how do we ensure that we also take this information to schools? How do we ensure that our clergies also begin to, have this information on the table when couples come for counseling? Can you, for example, bring this up? When our girl children are being, dedicated during, naming ceremony, can we also ensure that our clergies, whether pastors, imams, traditional leaders, whatever it is, also mention this publicly, that no, female genital mutilation is not a practice that anybody here should engage, and so this girl child should not actually be mutilated because it has several, harmful.
And looking at the conditions that we see these practices being done, it's pretty much pathetic. And at the end of the day, one would ask, where lies the family unit beyond the excuse of culture? You see your daughters, you see your girl child going through excruciating pain under unhealthy conditions. Sometimes they use the same blades or the same knives and a whole lot more. But now, if we have the Violence Against Women Act and everybody is saying, well, we are not having enough implementation, and then the punitive measure, 4 years or a 200,000 naira fine, isn't doing enough, then what are we doing? Okay, so
let me interject again and say that the trends are also changing. So what we've seen very clearly again is a pattern called medicalization. So that narrative that it's only done in very dirty locations are also stopping. So because some people also hear this, they say, no, I don't want my daughter to be.
But the focus mostly is around the rural areas.
I agree with you. But data again is also showing that you have a lot of this happening again in the urban centers because people come from this location. There's what we call exportation of professionals to go and do this. People export even from outside of the country. People come in and say, okay, in community A, say in Spain for example, people who actually believe in this culture will come together and then bring in someone from Africa right into their own country to actually do that. Yes. So that's why you also have these laws in several of these European countries, especially for the migrant group, to say that how do we ensure that you don't bring this harmful culture into our own country? And then you also have what is called holiday cutting. And so what happens is that the teachers in schools have been taught to say that, look, when your girls are traveling for holidays, is watch their countenance when they come back so that we find out if anything has happened to them. And they warn, parents also sternly. Back to your question in terms of, the VAP Act. So we have the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act 2015 that actually criminalizes female genital mutilation. But again, if you look at the entire value chain of female genital mutilation and then you look at who the key actors are on that value chain, you're beginning to see people you have filial relationship with, your father, your mother, your auntie, your uncle, the old man in the neighborhood, the auntie in the neighborhood that everybody actually adores and respects, gives reference to. So pray, how do you report your father to a law enforcement agent? Okay, so that's why we're actually having a lot of issues around enforcing. Who is going to do the report? We sent a Freedom of Information request to the Nigerian Police Force sometimes last year, and we're asking the Nigerian Police Force that, please, can you tell us if we have had any case of, mentions, anybody who has been prosecuted in the court? As we speak, there's even no data because we're yet to actually, we followed up with that letter 2-3 times. We're yet to get any response from the Office of the Inspector General of Police. So we're saying very clearly that if you continue to push from the angle of the law and say that this is criminal, what happens again is that you will drive the practice further underground. And so that's why we're seeing cases where people are saying that, look, is this what you say we should not do? That perhaps because of the way the cutting is happening. And then look at the different types we have. It seems that they were just mistakes. So someone is trying to cut and then cut further and then calls that type 2. Someone is trying to cut and then we have type 3. Someone is trying to cut in a particular way and then makes a mistake. We had a case of a girl who actually died simply because, the person who was doing the cutting did the wrong thing. And then what happened was that the girl actually bled to death at that particular point in time. And then luckily the person who told us the story, who was the cousin, was able to escape that simply because candidate A, who went in before her, was actually bleeding profusely. So in terms of ensuring that the law actually takes its course, it's a long walk. It's going to be a long walk. But what we can do very clearly is to make sure that people have enough information. Those excuses, those premises to say that if you don't do it, the girl will become promiscuous. We need to let people understand that promiscuity has nothing to do with...
The lifelong implication is just horrible.
Yes.
Now, globally, we have over 200 million girls and women who have undergone this procedure. Whether in, I don't even want to call it, is it fine to call it a surgical procedure? I'm not even comfortable being able to explain it. But we have also 68 million girls and women who are expected that between the ages of 2015 and by 2030 would have also gone through this procedure as well.
If nothing is done.
If nothing is done.
Yes.
And in one of the instances where we say nothing is really done in Nigeria and we have this trend just going on and on, irrespective of how much we know data is important, yet Nigeria does not have any sound, concrete data when we are looking at dealing with this issue. So how then do we know whether there is an increase, there's a decrease, or it's just at a plateau level and then pushing forward?
Okay, so 2 things. Let me start from talking about, the do no harm concept. So when we talk about this in community, remember again that we're saying that these are people's culture. So we do not go into community and say, this thing you're doing is horrible, it's barbaric. We don't use expressions like that when engaging with communities because you want to bring about behavior change. So you want to come from aspects of their culture that are wonderful, for example. You want to talk to them about, their cultures that are still being held, their traditional attire, the masquerade, for example, cultures that are beneficial. And then you move on to the harmful traditional culture and then you possibly also find out if there are previous cultures that they used to have but are stopped. Here in this country, we used to force feed children. If you remember, you hold on to the child and then you force feed the child and, at times...
Some children have choked
some children have choked, but you no longer see that again. So we use some of those examples to engage with them. Now, coming to the issue of data. So again, I say very clearly that we have very authentic data. There's something called the National Demographic and Health Survey Report that happens every 5 years. So we had the data from 2008, and then we had data from 2015, and then 2013 rather. Now we're waiting for data from 2018 to be published this year in 2019. We also have what we call the MICS, the Multiple Indicator Cluster Survey. Now, what do these data allow us to see? So it's courtesy of the NDHS, for example, which is a survey that we can tell very clearly that Osun had the highest, still has the highest prevalence until the data is released. Osun followed by Ebonyi, followed by Imo, followed by Ekiti, and then followed by Oyo, which has 65.6% prevalence. In terms of national prevalence... But don't you think this is just
a fraction of the reality that we are facing? There's much more.
Every survey you do is based on that. Remember again that in terms of children registration, we just have about 47% of children's births that is actually recorded in hospital. So the NGHS shows us that you have 24% of prevalence at the moment. So that's why you have 10% of the international burden, which is 20 million girls and women between ages 15 to 49 that have been mutilated in Nigeria.
Thank you very much for your time, Sola. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, and hopefully we get a concerted effort and global plan of action with Nigeria keying in strongly. Thank you.